And now we want to turn to the issue that is so fresh in our minds. Of course, I am talking about the elections that took place last week. But of course, the US elections were just one of dozens that took place around the world in 2024. And we want to talk about those too. And we are really looking forward to this conversation, everyone. Joining me are three insightful panelists who will help us make sense of what just happened and what we can expect as a result. Please come up to the stage now. Here they are. Let's get started. Peter Baker, yeah, you can give him a round of applause, is the chief White House correspondent for the New York Times. Eugene Daniels is the Politico Playbook co-author and White House correspondent. And Maria Ressa is a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, co-founder and CEO of Rappler, professor of practice at Columbia, SIPA, and ICFJ board member. Please give them a big round of applause. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having this conversation. I think a lot of people are going to be interested in what you have to say. And Peter, let's just start with you. You have covered 5 administrations. Talk about your perspective on what we all just witnessed. President-elect Donald Trump just won re-election, the second president in more than 100 years to win non-consecutive terms. Yeah. And he actually expanded his support, something that we had for years said, he's got this base of support, he's got this base of support. And what we saw in this election is that he actually expanded that. What do you make of this moment?
Yeah, I think, first of all, Kristen, thank you very much, and thank you for all you're doing for the great crowd here. It's an honor to be with all these amazing journalists, especially our award winners tonight. It's very inspiring. It makes me feel ashamed to think how exhausted I feel, given everything I know.
I felt the same,
yeah, yes. that everybody else has been going through over the years. Look, this is an extraordinary election for a lot of reasons. I think for a long time we debated what Donald Trump's election in 2016 meant about America and about our society and our democracy. And I think a lot of people thought, well, maybe he was an anomaly, an aberration, a fluke. He got in on the Electoral College, but not a popular vote. A lot of things happened that year, and then he lost again in 2020. But he's proved he's not an anomaly. He's not an aberration. In fact, he is probably one of the most transformative forces in American politics that we've seen in our lifetime. For good or bad, whether we like him or not, he is in fact reshaping the nature of politics in Washington and in our country. We've even seen just in the last week alone with these rapid fire announcements. We just got another one I think he made at an event tonight. He told us he's going to announce Doug Burgum tomorrow for Interior Secretary. It's breaking news as we're sitting here.
Yes.
And I think with these appointments, he's challenging the system. He's living up to his promise to try to disrupt the system, and then we're going to see how the system responds.
Eugene, what are your key takeaways from what we witnessed in this presidential election? And we will talk about the Congress, but what are your key takeaways and pick up on where Peter left off?
I think partly I spent a lot of time covering the Democratic side of things in this election, and I think my key takeaway is that the Democratic brand is bad in a lot of parts of the country. I interviewed Sherrod Brown, a senator from Ohio, this morning, who lost his seat. And he's one of those folks who've been for years telling the Democratic Party that they got to work on workers, talk about workers a lot more. He mentioned NAFTA as kind of the starting spot where his party started taking their eyes off of workers. And you can listen to that on Playbook Deep Dive at 5 a.m. tomorrow morning. It'll be at the top of Playbook at 6:15 in your inboxes. But he makes a really interesting point that the party has to figure out that Donald Trump is tapping into something. He's not this aberration that folks thought he might be. And so that means that you have to fix it, right? And the infighting that's happening right now is, can you fix and focus on workers and working class? When a lot of people think about working class, they think about white men in blue collar counties who don't have a college degree. That's not true. And so they have to figure out a way to be able to have this kind of diverse, multicultural tint while also doing the workers. And it's going to take a long time, right? It took a long time to get here. And can they actually do that in the next 2 years before the next presidential starts?
Maria Ressa, how is the world watching what just happened here in the United States?
Shock and fear. I think, when you really look at it, and again, not taking any political position on this as journalists, right? Except for the facts. And I think what we were covering this, Rappler was covering this from the Philippines, and it's funny, so many comments in our chat that said, oh my God, it's the Philippinization of American politics. Things that we didn't expect, right? We always knew, studies had always said, and this is way before social media came around, that up to 85% of how we vote is not based on what we think, it's based on how we feel. This is, if you think of 2016 as the tipping point for the political tipping point of social media and information operations, and you have to ask the question of how much of our agency have we lost to a poisoned information ecosystem? And for journalists, how much of what we do gets to the thinking slow side of the people we serve?
I'm glad you raised that point. I had an opportunity to interview Doris Kearns Goodwin, and she said to me that the media landscape right now, the media ecosystem, is as divided as it was during the Civil War. In other words, you have to go back to the Civil War in this country to find a moment when the media landscape is as divided and fractured, quite frankly. Speak to that and the power of that, and how that, quite frankly, adds to the responsibility that we all bear every day.
Yeah, I think you can say that in terms of division, but in terms of both scale and isolation, we're at a whole different landscape today because big tech, and let me put it this way, the first part of artificial intelligence, which is social media, which we haven't actually dealt with, the least regulated industry globally, right? They complain, my friends there complain, but be a journalist where you're legally liable for what you print, for what you write, for what you broadcast. So what we're seeing globally is actually an extension of a very basic principle of technology, of the advertising and marketing part of technology that is at the core of the AI, the first one out, and that is personalization. This concept that, it is very good to give every one of us what we each personally want. Imagine, if you're talking sneakers, okay, so you looked at sneakers and for 2 weeks, sneakers followed you on the internet. But we're way beyond that now. We're now at the stage where every person in this room can have their own personalized reality based on what you feel, on your cognitive biases, where you've been nudged to a particular position and then you keep going back to your cognitive bias. So imagine if we each have our personal reality, we'd be living in an insane asylum.
Yeah, right.
It feels like that sometimes.
Welcome to Washington.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So DC, yeah.
Peter, pick
Yeah,
up
well,
on that point. And,
We are living in our own personal realities. I think that's one of the things that has changed in our media landscape, to your point, talking with Doris. I mean, when I was growing up, I don't want to speak for any of you younger people, when I was growing up, though, we had 3 main networks and PBS, and we had the main newspapers and the wires and the news magazines, and we all started from the same fact set, right? And then we all debated what it meant, okay? So if we all agree that these are the facts, what does it mean for what level of taxes we should have, or our foreign policy toward the Middle East, or healthcare, and so forth. Today, we just don't live in that same universe. If you go out and interview voters, if you go to these Trump rallies versus a Kamala Harris rally, you found vastly different conceptions of what the major issues are in America, and even what the major fact sets are about those issues. And it's what's hard is to find a way to knit those realities back together again, so we can have a common discourse and a common debate.
It's such an important phrase, a common discourse and a common debate. Eugene, how do you approach that, given how fractured we are right now, and given the fact that here we are at the start of a new administration?
I think you focus on the facts, right? Like our job is to give the country its vegetables when we're giving them, right, playbook. So we give y'all some chocolate and, a little sugar every once in a while as well. But like you have to make sure that people understand the facts. And, at times I think, listening to everyone talking tonight, it's such a reminder of what it looks like to actually like fight the good fight and how bad it can get if you take your eye off the ball for even just a second. And I think the way that, I like to come at it when I'm writing and when I'm reporting is that at the end of the day, my job is to be a mirror, right? To the American people, this is what you look like. This is what you think, this is what you talk about. Here are the facts of what happened here in Washington, D.C. around those things. And then they make the decision next, right? And not putting our thumb on the scale. And I think it feels often that people aren't listening. And I think, I talk to a lot of, especially young journalists now, who, as we're going into this next kind of what we know is going to be a wild 4 years, that they're worried that it's not going to matter. And at the end of the day, we still have to do that because it's more important than it is ever before. And whether or not we're able to stitch it back together again, we at least all have to try.
Maria, you and I were discussing at dinner that you actually were one of only 4 journalists who interviewed Duterte when he first took power. Talk a little bit about that. You went into that interview exactly as Eugene is saying, wanting to be fair, wanting to be a tough journalist. What were your takeaways and what, if any, parallels are you seeing right now between the Philippines?
So many parallels. I think, first of all, the Philippines Constitution is patterned after the United States. Our quick history, we spent 300 years in a convent and 50 years in Hollywood. 300 years of colonial rule, 50 years of American colonial rule. But our Constitution is this. Our countries, based on our Constitution, have very strong executives. And what made Duterte the strongest leader we'd ever had was he controlled the 3 branches of government. Welcome to control of the 3 branches of government, right? You now have a similar situation, and you have a Supreme Court that already is giving a sitting president impunity as long as he fulfills the role of the president. These are very alarming things watching from outside. Look, before Duterte, when he was mayor, I interviewed him a few months before elections, and that John Edward clip where he talks about killing people? He talked about killing at least 3 people when he, that was my interview, right? We didn't believe him. I didn't believe him.
You didn't take him at face value.
I sat like a TV reporter and nodded my head, and then after he became president, it was the beginning. And understand, hold this moment in your mind, because after that, I never got another interview. You will ask the tough questions, but the tough questions only work if you have a shared reality. Soon after that, right, the information operations on social media went bottom up. By August 2016, so he took office that interview was soon after he took office, which was in June, July, August, the end of June. So by August 2016, the information operations went crazy. We kept doing the stories on the drug war because the killings in the drug war began 4 hours after the inauguration. What will be at stake is justice and rule of law. And the institutions that used to have checks and balances, the responsibility of checks and balances, you're gonna have to watch step by step. I think Madeleine Albright called it slicing the salami. We called it death by 1,000 cuts. So similar, the appointments that you're making. Duterte, in the first instance, named all of his appointments. He appointed 6,000 people. And it was interesting because there was one woman who campaigned for him. She's a singer, dancer. She was like a more salacious Spice Girl.
Can it get more salacious in the Spice Girls?
Yes, because her Facebook pages, they became very big because she and her girls would have pillow fights every Sunday morning. Wow. That was how they grew, right? So anyway, it took the first time she didn't make it in. The second time she almost made it in. She became a government official the third time. So again, it depends on how strong. Sorry, that's a long-winded answer to your question.
No, don't be sorry. Right? It's fascinating to hear.
Let me just say one last part of this. It took former President Duterte of the Philippines roughly 6 months to crumble our institutions. And so let me tell you what happened to us. Bottom-up social media attacks, you say a lie 1,000,000 times, it becomes a fact in our information ecosystem. It's the reason why you have such different realities, right? It isn't people. The question is, do we have agency when we are being bombarded with lies? When the social media literally, as of 2018, an MIT study said that lies spread 6 times faster after Elon Musk bought Twitter, turned it into X, fired 80% of the safety engineers. Do you think it's still 6 times faster? Right? So what happened after that was you begin to normalize and then justice shifts. I mean, this was a joke among us. I would say, Duterte brought the third string in, and you can't tell the difference between ignorance and arrogance. And the people who should stand up and stop it won't, because there are repercussions. Fear grows over time. Oh my God, I'm giving you such bad. Let me put it this way. The rest of the world is hoping that the United States, that this is not the Philippinization of American politics.
Well, it's remarkable to hear, first of all, about your interview, about your own personal experiences in terms of what happened with the Philippines democracy. Pick up on that point. Eugene, the fact that, we are poised to cover Donald Trump in the White House, Republicans with control of the Senate and with control of the House, as we just learned. And of course, the Supreme Court, which ideologically is quite conservative.
I mean, what we're going to see is a test for not just the entire country, but for the Republican Party, right? Yesterday, when he said that Matt Gaetz is going to be his attorney general, as we're calling senators and my colleagues are running around on the Hill trying to get folks to say things, there's an uncomfortability with it, but it was rare. I think there were 2, Murkowski and Collins, who were very clear, like, not happening. Right. But the others weren't, right? And so what that tells you is he's able to continue to push and do the things that he wants to do, right? Thune, the new leader, is going to have to make decisions. Is he going to use recess appointments, as Donald Trump seems to want, to get past the senators who don't want this? Are there like 6 senators who are going to hold a lot of power and sway here, going to stand up and say no to people like Matt Gaetz? Maybe Tulsi Gabbard's another one that made people uncomfortable. Peter Hegseth for the Fox News anchor. RFK, who HHS nominee at this point. And what we've seen, the evidence in the past shows us that they fight for a little bit, but eventually they give in, right? There's a fear of his supporters, there's a fear of retribution, there's a fear of tweets or a social post from Truth Social now. And when you talk to Republicans behind closed doors, they still have those same fears. So I think, we're going to see them continue to push and do the kinds of things that Donald Trump wants them to do, which is not abnormal, right? The party of in the House and the Senate does what the president wants, but with the Democratic Party, we saw a lot more pushback under Biden, right? You think of Manchin, for example. That may not exist in the same exact way.
Peter, it's a great point, because the confirmation hearings, or the way in which the Senate decides to deal with President-elect Trump's nominees, will really be the first big test of whether some of these senators will stand up to President-elect Trump if they disagree with him.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, let's be real here. Matt Gaetz would never be confirmed in a normal Senate in a normal time. It just, I mean, under investigation for sex trafficking, the matter was dropped, but now the Ethics Committee has its own report. He has said so many things about what the Justice Department should do. He's talked about abolishing the FBI and the ATF. That would never pass muster with any Senate that we ever saw before now. So the question is, are they going to defer to President Trump, President-elect Trump now, as Eugene just talked about? And that will be a test because, in fact, the Senate, even while in the same party as the president, is a co-equal, along with the House, a co-equal branch of government. They have their own constitutional authority and responsibility. If they surrender that by saying, we're just going to simply recess and let him put whoever he wants in place, that's a fundamental change in the system as envisioned by the founders. And I think that's what we're talking about here. So, you know, Eugene said something a few minutes ago about being fair and factual, and I think it's exactly right. Our job as reporters is not to be the opposition, which is what Trump honestly wants us to be, because it's easier for him if he could portray us as the opposition. But it is our job, I think, to stand up in defense of truth and facts, and not to pretend that something that is abnormal and that has never been seen before is just more politics as usual and everything that we've seen before. And I think the institutions are, as Maria talked about, being tested now. I spent 4 years with my wife in Russia for the Washington Post. We watched Putin's first term and we saw how quickly things can change. Now, America is not Russia, but we used to think America was unique. And I think we've learned, in fact, it's not, that institutions here are vulnerable just as they are in a lot of other countries, and we're going to see what the people who populate these institutions choose to do about it.
Globally, obviously, this election will have huge implications, the war in Ukraine, the war in the Middle East, and beyond, all around the world. Peter, what are some of the big questions for you as you prepare to cover this new administration?
Well, on foreign policy, obviously, Trump again represents something very different than the bipartisan consensus since World War II, right? It is a return to, as he calls it, America first, as he defines it. Some use the word isolationist, some use the word nationalist. These are all fair terms, probably, but it's different than both Democrats and Republican presidents have envisioned the role of the United States in the world. We have a president now coming in who has said about NATO that Russia can do whatever the hell they want, is his words, to any of our NATO allies if they haven't spent what he thinks they ought to spend on their defense. That means that NATO is a dead letter. Let's face it, he doesn't have to withdraw from NATO now because he's already said that Article 5, commitment to mutual defense, does not apply unless he decides it does. In the Middle East, obviously, we have a raging war still on multiple fronts. He has not said anything about how he actually would approach that. He has a history of being supportive of Israel, but he actually has also said, the only thing he's really said about the Gaza war is, I think they should end it because it looks bad on TV.
Yeah.
So we don't know yet how he's going to approach that either.
Eugene, what are some of the big questions for you as you prepare to cover this new administration on the world stage?
I mean, how, as the rest of the world watches and sees what we're doing, how much pushback is the rest of the kind of alliances, NATO, for example, are they going to do, right? It's interesting when you go to one of these international meetings, right, and you watch how everyone flocks to the United States. It happened under Trump. And the question when we've been trying to talk to some of these leaders or folks that work for these leaders, they also are falling over themselves to say, like, oh, no, we're so excited to work with you, Donald Trump, again, right? And they're actually not. And so if they do start seeing that he's like, I don't care about Article 5, are they actually going to stand up and say something? Are they going to push America to be the promise that we've made for hundreds of years? I think that, to me, when you're thinking globally, is most interesting. And obviously what happens with journalists, right? I think with everyone watching us, if things start to fall here, that gives, we were talking earlier, a permission structure in other parts of the world to do worse things in those areas.
Maria Ressa, I'm going to give you the last thought. What will you be watching for? And also, when you look at democracies around the world in the wake of all of the elections that we have just witnessed, where are we?
You caught me at one of this is a tipping point moment, right? And what is at stake and was at stake even before these elections was the question of whether an international rules-based order still exists, right? because you had a Putin, a Netanyahu, you have Sudan, you have Xi, you know, the closest we have ever come to a shooting war in what you call South China Sea, what we call the West Philippine Sea, was June 16th this year. Because as everyone was looking away, in our part of the world, it's Taiwan, it's China, and the first place that it will happen will be the South China Sea, so, or West Philippine Sea, depending on which nomenclature you'll use. So look, we're all watching with bated breath. I would say for American news organizations, you have to be prepared, because in some ways, what I'm seeing in the coverage of, you know, it's the podcast, it's not any of those. It's whether a shared reality exists and whether the values will withstand the attack of power and money. It goes back to that, right? So will you bring us back together? Sorry, the last part I'd say is values always work. I look at what journalists are doing all around the world, and you are at the front lines now for all of us. Well, no pressure. I mean, sorry, Rana. I mean, that's really the front lines, and Ukraine is the front lines. But we are all, I guess the question I always wonder is, you know, if we came under attack, if our democracy is under attack, would we go outside and do what the Ukrainians have done? Right? Would we do what the journalists in Gaza are doing? You have that equivalent here. And it will be, they'll come at you, look, last part, it was weaponization of social media, and then it was weaponization of the law, right? So I had 11 criminal charges. I'm only down to 2, so there is an upside.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
So good luck to all of us.
Thank you, and thank you for your bravery. Please, thank you. Maria Ressa, thank you. And Eugene and Peter, thank you for your thoughtful, wonderful comments. Thank you. It is such an honor to be able to sit and hear from you. And always an honor to hear from both of them as well. Fortunately, I get to talk to them like once a week. Thank you all.